A young boy stands firm, his resolve unshakable as he tries to save a girl from a pack of wild boars that have their sights set on her. Driven by an intense determination, he vows to live a life that leaves a lasting mark on the world, something that will prove he was here. The scene shifts to a rainy street where people have gathered on the sidewalk, watching a man lying motionless after a tragic accident. As he draws his last breath, regret fills him. He feels pity for himself, passing away without family, without friends, and without ever pursuing something he was truly passionate about. In these final moments, he wishes that if there is life after death, he could have the chance to live differently in a new time and place, to truly make something of himself. In a peaceful forest, a family of fairies strolls through the trees. The mother expresses her worries to her son, Lee, who is eager to go foraging alone. She's uneasy, especially since he's only 10 years old, far too young in her eyes to explore the woods without supervision. She insists he should be at least 30 before going out on his own. Lee's face falls into a pout, longing for the freedom to make his own choices. He assures her that it's safe. There are no muscular wolves or dangerous creatures in the forest at this time of year. Still, his mother remains unconvinced. Lee insists he can handle foraging and napping in the forest with ease, showing a maturity beyond his years. His father, watching the exchange, comments that Lee is much more grown up than most kids his age. His mother agrees, noting that he seems to be growing up a little too quickly. But Lee knows there's more to it. He remembers his past life as Boru, a man who died at 30. He still doesn't quite understand why he was reincarnated, but he wonders if some divine force granted him a second chance. When he first woke up in this new world, Lee discovered he had been reborn as a fairy, a species that can live up to 1,000 years. Adjusting to life as a toddler again was no easy feat, but now, 10 years later, he's itching to explore. Adventure, however, isn't a natural trait for elves. Their village is hidden behind an enormous invisible barrier designed to protect the ancient Yggdrasil tree growing at its heart. With no natural disasters and almost no dangerous animals, the elves have enjoyed generations of peace. The Yggdrasil tree produces abundant fruit, which has become their staple food. Content with their safe surroundings, most elves spend thousands of years living comfortably within the village, never feeling the need to step beyond its boundaries. But Lee feels different. The quiet, sheltered life of his village isn't enough for him. At that moment, the fairy chief arrives, noticing once again the spark of curiosity and energy in Lee's eyes. Like his parents, the chief is uneasy with Lee's desire to explore on his own. He points out that very few elves have ever shown such interest in the world beyond their village, and those who did often met unfortunate fates. With a firm tone, he warns Lee that the outside world is harsh and unkind. In his 600 years as chief, he has seen many fairies who ventured out only to fall prey to human trickery and meet untimely deaths. The chief then turns to Lee with a serious expression and asks him directly, does he still want to leave? Lee pauses, reflecting on the gratitude he feels for the loving upbringing his parents have given him. Yet deep in his heart, even with a lifespan stretching 1,000 years, he knows he'll never be content confined within the safe limits of their small world. There's too much to see, too much to learn, and too many people to meet. Filled with newfound resolve, he declares that he wants to leave a mark on this world, to live a life with no regrets. Hearing his determined words, Lee's parents couldn't help but smile, pride swelling in their hearts. Their son knew his own mind and had the courage to follow his own path. They exchanged a look and, with a nod, decided not to stand in his way. The chief, noticing the fire in Lee's eyes, gently patted his head and gave his blessing. He then recalled the fairy named Lee, who had left the village nearly 100 years ago, seemingly in pursuit of a similar dream. However, there was a condition. With a serious tone, the chief declared that before Lee could leave, he must pass a test. He explained that the outside world was dangerous, and Lee would need to protect himself using his own magic. The chief told him he had to reach the highest level of elven restorative magic, a power rooted deep in his soul. If he could pass the test within 100 years, the chief would grant him permission to leave the village. Lee paused to consider. 100 years felt like an eternity, but it was only a tenth of a fairy's lifespan. If it meant ensuring his safety, he was willing to commit. With a final reminder, the chief urged him to take the test seriously and prepare well. 10 years later, Lee practiced his healing magic with unwavering dedication. With a flick of his hand, he channeled his magic into the ancient ancestor tree, a towering relic over 1,000 years old. Miraculously, the once withered tree sprang back to life, its leaves vibrant and green. The chief, observing from a distance, was stunned as the young fairy effortlessly restored the massive tree. What Lee had accomplished wasn't just an ordinary healing spell. It was the pinnacle of fairy magic, a mastery level that usually took centuries to achieve. And yet, here stood Lee, having reached it in just 10 years. Shaken by this incredible display of skill, the chief couldn't resist asking how the young fairy had advanced so quickly. With a casual shrug, Lee explained that he'd been training in magic since he was 5, long before he asked for permission to leave the forest. His approach had been methodical and focused. He spent countless hours studying ancient texts in the tree library, determined to master every aspect of magic. One book he read described how a fairy's magical strength depended on 3 key factors: state of mind, attitude, and effort. It also explained that magical power grows with frequent use. This clear guidance was all Lee needed to structure his training. Taking the book's advice to heart, he constantly pushed himself to the edge, using his magic repeatedly until he reached his absolute limits. But during his training journey, Lee realized something unique about himself compared to the humans described in the texts. Humans, who generally live around 60 years, peak in magical power around age 20. Elves, however, with lifespans of 1,000 years, keep growing in strength for far longer. Lee figured his magic would likely continue to increase until he reached around 300 years old. The chief was deeply impressed. He'd never seen anyone reach such a high level of restorative magic so quickly. Yet Lee still had 80 years left to complete his test. Intrigued, the chief listened as Lee described the different types of magic he'd read about in his studies. Each race, it seemed, possessed unique magical strengths. Elves excelled at healing magic, dwarves commanded earth magic, and demons wielded a variety of powers tailored to their species. Lee theorized that with enough study and practice, one might be able to learn magic from other races as well. Curious, Lee asked if there were other magical guides beyond the one he'd mastered on restorative spells. Still astonished by Lee's ambition, the chief confirmed that such guides existed, but was surprised at the young fairy's eagerness to learn other forms of magic. With a grin, Lee admitted that mastering just one type wasn't enough for him. He wanted to explore and absorb as much knowledge as possible before his test ended, driven to expand his skills and experience. Impressed by Lee's determination to study magic, even in a world where demons no longer roamed, the chief decided to entrust him with a rare and valuable key. This key, passed down through generations, granted access to a hidden library deep within the forest, a place containing forbidden books filled with advanced and dangerous magic. However, the chief warned Lee that mastering some of these ancient texts could take centuries. What Lee sought was not for the faint-hearted, and it would test his resolve to the fullest. Fueled by this incredible opportunity, Lee eagerly accepted the key, vowing to reach the pinnacle of every form of magic. Seeing his excitement, the chief reminded him to pace himself carefully. And so, 10 years passed. Now, at the age of 30, Lee had kept his promise to himself. He had successfully studied every type of magic available in the library. His mastery was so remarkable that the chief entrusted him with the responsibility of safeguarding the library and tending to the sacred texts within. Today marked a significant day for Le as he prepared to venture beyond his home in search of new magical knowledge. The elves had limited contact with the outside world, mostly through a long-standing cultural exchange with the nearest human family, the House of Garland. This pact, originally established by a former elven chief and the head of the human family, secured a peaceful relationship and mutual cooperation between them. Over the years, Le had grown close to Gillet Garland, the current head of House Garland. The two had often trained together, sparring and sharing ideas, with Le frequently winning their friendly sword fights. Le fondly recalled their conversations, especially Gillet's recent excitement about proposing to his childhood friend. Gillet had even expressed his wish for Le to be there at the right time. Waiting on a tree branch for his friend to arrive, Le eagerly anticipated any new spell books Gillet might have brought along. After a while, he spotted a carriage approaching and assumed it was Gillet. But as he looked closer, something felt off. Still, with his usual cheer, Le jumped down from the tree, greeting the figure with a warm question about what spell guides they might have brought. The man, clearly not Gillet, was startled by Le's sudden appearance. He stammered nervously, murmuring that everything his father had told him about the elves was true. Realizing the stranger wasn't his friend, Lee took a closer look as the man gave a respectful bow, introducing himself as Gallus, Gillet's eldest son, and the heir of House Garland. With a friendly demeanor, Gallus explained that his father often spoke of Le, but with a heavy heart, he shared unfortunate news. Gillet, now weakened by old age, could no longer make the journey himself. As the eldest, Gallus had chosen to come in his father's place, apologizing for the unexpected change. Le, somewhat removed from the passage of time, asked when it was that he'd last seen Gillet. Gallus replied that it had been 20 years. In that moment, Le was struck by how swiftly time moved for humans. Their lives, he realized, passed in a flash, while his own stretched on for centuries. The fleeting nature of human existence seemed profound when contrasted with his own seemingly endless lifespan. Surprised to learn that Les still had 7 years left before he could leave the forest, Gallus calculated that this would make Len 93 years old. Despite the big age gap, Les shared his hope that after completing the patriarch's examination, he'd visit Gillet and his family. Gallus was thrilled to hear this, confident that his father would be overjoyed to reunite with an old friend. After a warm farewell, Gallus left the forest, and Le found himself filled with renewed determination. Inspired by their encounter, they resolved to excel in the patriarch's exam. Gallus had left him with several magical guidebooks, and Le eagerly threw himself into them, diving deep into this wealth of knowledge. While studying, one particular book captured his attention, a story detailing a hero who had once defeated the Demon King. In this world, the Demon King was long gone, and to most humans, the ancient magic of the fairies and their mystical powers had faded into legend. As Le continued to explore the collection, he stumbled upon an old, battered guide to ancient magic. The writing was almost illegible, but its contents sparked his curiosity. This was no ordinary magic. It was a guide to ancient spells. According to the book, long ago, demi-humans and now extinct demons wielded ancient magic to control the world. Unlike the 4 basic types of magic, these ancient spells required special conditions and could take years of intense study to master. Driven by curiosity, Le decided to try one of the spells. He chose a movement spell and, without expecting much, spoke the incantation. To his amazement, a magic circle appeared beside him, glowing with a strange light. In an instant, the spell activated, and he was transported to a different forest. Dazed and disoriented, Le was jolted by the growls of fierce beasts and the nauseating scent of fresh blood. Before he could fully grasp his surroundings, one of the beasts lunged at him. Nearby, soldiers frantically questioned his origins, wondering if he was part of a guild force. Still reeling from his success in breaking through the elf village's barrier with ancient magic, Le looked ahead and caught sight of a young human girl. She was bruised, battered, and barely hanging on, yet somehow alive, waiting, it seemed, for someone to save her. Le suddenly realized he had accidentally teleported beyond the concealment barrier. Behind him, a group of humans panicked at his abrupt appearance. However, his attention was immediately drawn to 3 massive magical wolves standing in front of him, each one larger than a grown man, and all of them clearly furious at his arrival. Looking past the wolves, he noticed several injured children lying on the ground, with only one small girl conscious and clinging to life. Meanwhile, the humans muttered complaints about their situation, referring to the children as worthless goods that were of no use to them. Afraid of the wolves, they turned and tried to flee. Watching them attempt to escape, Le cast a shadow spell known as Black Whip, summoning a dark portal in their path. From it, a thick, sticky substance spilled out, ensnaring the humans and holding them in place, immobilizing them completely. With the immediate threat dealt with, Le turned his focus to rescuing the small girl lying on the ground. The wolves lunged at him, and in response, he used his magic to harden his right arm like stone. He struck one of the wolves straight on the head, knocking it out instantly. Not letting his guard down, he assumed a fighting stance, ready for the next attack. In a matter of moments, he swiftly dealt with the rest of the wolf pack. Approaching the girl, who was barely breathing, lay crouched beside her. She gazed up at him weakly, and he assured her in a calm voice that she would be okay. Summoning a combination of fire and healing magic known as Dragon's Healing Breath, he cast a spell that enveloped her in powerful flames. To the astonishment of the humans watching, the fire didn't burn her. Instead, it began absorbing her wounds. As the flames dissipated, the girl stood up, fully healed and free from any trace of injury. The girl tried to speak to Le, but only jumbled sounds came out. He quickly noticed a magical sealing necklace around her neck, preventing her from speaking. As he reached out to touch it, she shrank back in fear, knowing that the necklace would explode if removed. Le smiled gently, reassuring her to trust him. Carefully grasping the necklace, he channeled a counterspell through his left hand to neutralize the speaking seal, while infusing it with a destruction spell called Demon's Thread. In an instant, the enchanted threads sliced through the metal, freeing the girl. Le tossed the necklace far into the air, where it exploded like a firework, a dazzling reminder of her newfound freedom. Tears streamed down her face as she washed, realizing that she was finally free. With the girl safe, Lei turned his attention to the humans still bound by his sticky shadow spell. Trembling, they tried to insist they were only protecting the children but claimed they'd run out of luck when they encountered the wolves. Le, unimpressed, reminded them that as an elf, his hearing was sharp. He'd overheard them discussing the children as if they were mere merchandise. Narrowing his gaze, he warned them he'd spare no mercy unless they explained who they were, why they were being pursued, and why they were traveling with children. This confession immediately opened them up to talk, and they nervously promised to reveal everything. They admitted they were human traffickers, dealing with desperate parents who would hand over their children in exchange for money. They explained they were being hunted because someone in the Adventurers Guild had set them up. Finally, they confessed that they were en route to make a delivery when they realized they were being followed. As Lei listened, he was reminded of how similar humans in this world were to those in his own past life. He recalled his childhood, when the elder fairies had warned him never to trust humans, labeling them as savage, deceitful, and untrustworthy. With a calm expression, Lei raised his hand, preparing a spell to erase their memories of him with the memory-altering magic, Burial of Memories. In an instant, the traffickers turned into dazed, bewildered shells of themselves, completely unaware of their past encounter. The little girl behind him tugged at his sleeve. She asked if he was the one who saved her. He smiled, confirming that he was, and introduced himself as a fairy. Seeing she could speak again made him feel relieved, though he gently apologized for not being able to save her friends. His gaze fell on a small cross-shaped scar on her chest, a painful mark of her captivity. The girl began to cry, feeling the weight of not being able to help her friends due to her own weakness. With awe, she remarked on the strength of his magic that had saved her. Then, looking up at him with a determined expression, she told him she wanted to go with him. Le could see the determination in her eyes and knew she meant every word. He thought about it deeply but ultimately told her he couldn't take her with him. As a fairy, he understood the challenges of traveling with a human. Their sense of time was just too different. Gently patting her head, he cast a sleeping spell, murmuring to himself that it would be another 7 years before she could truly see the world beyond, a span that would feel like a lifetime to her. As she drifted to sleep, he caught her before she could fall. Listening carefully, he could hear the adventurers approaching to deal with the traitors. Swiftly, he leaped up into a nearby tree, holding her close. Looking down at the sleeping child, he whispered with a smile that if her resolve remained just as strong in 7 years, they would meet again. Years later, they began hearing rumors of a young, unnamed woman who had gained fame through remarkable military feats. Now on the 100th anniversary since Le became a fairy, the tribe's elder received a visitor, a mysterious figure cloaked and hooded in the same style that Le wore for his final trial discussions. The elder explained to this stranger that fairies were meant to live quietly, protected under Idol's watch, and expressed his unease about Le's ambitions. The hooded figure picked up a piece of fruit from a nearby bowl and remarked that a fairy stepping into the outside world was like a mouse leaping into a battlefield. Nothing good could come of it. With a bite of the fruit, they continued, warning that a fairy crossing into the world's chaos would find trouble. Meanwhile, Le stepped out of his home, brimming with excitement. The day of his long-awaited trial had finally arrived. The tribe elder asked Le if he was still certain about leaving the ancient forest. Without hesitation, Le confirmed that his resolve hadn't wavered in the slightest. Just then, a voice chimed in, noting that the elder was right when he said Le had an unbreakable spirit. Surprised, Le looked around to find the source of the voice but saw no one. The elder responded to the voice, acknowledging that Le wasn't someone easily stopped. The voice replied that if the elder was allowing Le to leave, then he must be a prodigy worth seeing firsthand. Suddenly, the voice's owner appeared before Le, a small figure resembling a young girl, yet carrying an aura of wisdom. She introduced herself as Ria, a 600-year-old fairy. Le was stunned and immediately recognized her name, recalling the tales of a mysterious fairy who had appeared to humans, healing their wounds with rare fruit. He felt a thrill meeting Ria, knowing she was the very fairy who had collected all the books he had read about the outside world. Ria explained the rules of his trial. He'd have to endure her attacks until he exhausted her magic. She told him he could use any spells he wished. Then with a playful smirk, she asked him to go easy on her. Le, thrilled for the challenge, expressed his excitement. As a glowing magic circle lit up beneath his feet, he leaped into the air, narrowly avoiding the earth formation erupting from the ground below. Shocked, he realized he hadn't heard any incantation and had never encountered such a powerful spell that could be summoned so quickly. The rocky formation grew larger, forcing Le to dodge rapidly. bracing himself for an intense test of skill and endurance. Rhea warned him that humans were fierce, cunning, and cowardly. As her staff charged up another spell, she told the young fairy that talent alone wouldn't be enough to survive in the outside world. But to her surprise, she saw that Lee had already broken free from the earth magic cage she had set around him, locking her attack with his own earth magic. Intrigued, Rhea realized he was capable of more than just healing spells. Studying him with a hint of suspicion, she commented that there was something human-like about him. Lee just smiled, knowing she wasn't entirely wrong. He used a wind spell known as Still to launch himself high into the air. Rhea quickly retaliated, hurling fireballs from her staff. While dodging them, Lee analyzed the situation, realizing that his biggest challenge was her ability to cast spells without incantations. As more fireballs came his way, Rhea seemed confident she had him cornered. But Les surprised her, changing direction mid-air to dodge each fiery blast. Even as he maneuvered to avoid her relentless attacks, Rhea asked why he was so determined to venture outside. Le explained that while the elf village was the most peaceful place he knew, he wanted to leave a mark on the world, something to be remembered by. He recalled the loneliness of his previous life and the regret of never doing anything truly meaningful. Now with a second chance, he dreamed of becoming an adventurer who would make a lasting impact. Seeing the conviction in his eyes, Rhea asked him why he wanted to leave. In turn, Lee asked her why she had ventured into the outside world. Taking a bite from an apple, Rhea casually replied that she simply wanted to taste more delicious fruits. Her response shocked Lee, shattering the image he had of her as a mystical fairy who healed humans with rare fruit. Rhea went on to explain that she loved tough, hearty fruits, but after 50 years of eating nothing else, she grew bored and set out to find more exotic flavors. It took her 300 years of training before she was finally prepared for the journey. She then mentioned with a hint of sadness that many of her friends hadn't survived the dangers of the outside world. She went on to explain that her centuries-long journey allowed her to witness the marvels of human innovation, which made it easier to travel across different lands and indulge in a wide variety of fruits. Over time, she confessed, she'd come to enjoy the wonders of the outside world. Rhea then charged her staff, preparing to unleash all her power. She launched a barrage of fireballs, forcing Le back on the defensive. Seeing an opening, he decided to strike, using a spell known as Magic Empowerment to harden his right arm into stone. Charging forward, he swung at her with full force, smashing her staff in half. As she picked up the shattered pieces from the ground, Rhea congratulated him on breaking her staff. She explained that it contained a magical stone created by humans, empowered with elemental magic, which allowed her to cast spells without incantations. Le, surprised, asked if this meant she hadn't been using her own magic throughout the test. She admitted that she wanted to see if he could detect the subtle tricks she used to deceive her opponents. But even so, she was impressed by his resilience. With a proud smile, she congratulated him on passing the trial. Lee grinned, thanking her warmly. The woman suddenly patted her head like an elderly lady and told him that he had done his best. She then shattered the moment by joking that he would make a great demon king. Meanwhile, in a bustling market in the outside world, a young woman walked through the crowds. She made her way to a fruit stall, holding a bag full of coins. She looked at the stall owner and said she wanted to buy every piece of fruit. The owner, surprised, asked if she was sure she wanted to spend that much money on fruit. She nodded, explaining that she'd heard that fairies loved fruit. Gazing up at the sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that her fateful encounter with the fairy who saved her was drawing closer. Le excitedly shared the news with his parents that he passed the test, filling them with joy. But he surprised them even more by announcing he wanted to leave as soon as the next day. His concerned mother gently told him there was no need to rush. After all, he was only 100 years old. Le, however, was undeterred, assuring her that he already had Rhea's blessing to go. His father, smiling warmly, mentioned how much he cared for Rhea, treating her like a younger sister. Knowing that Rhea believed in his abilities was all the confirmation he needed to feel ready for the outside world. Placing a hand on his wife's shoulder, his father asked Le if he was truly committed to leaving. Le met his father's gaze with steady eyes, giving a firm nod. The husband and wife exchanged a look filled with pride for their son. Then Le's father left briefly, saying he had something to give him. Meanwhile, his mother took a precious gemstone from her hair and handed it to Le. She explained it was a charm gifted by the divine Triadril when she and Le's father had married. Pinning it into Le's hair, she told him that as long as he wore it, he carried the protection of the divine tree with him always. Lee's mother embraced him warmly from behind, asking him to promise he'd never leave their world before they did. Holding her hands, he assured her with a quiet vow that he wouldn't. Meanwhile, his father returned, carrying a large chest packed with food, enough to last 10 years. With a proud smile, he explained that he had always known Lei would leave their nest someday, so he had been saving up provisions for this moment. Lei's mother, chuckling, reminded her husband that their son couldn't possibly carry such a large stash, quickly deflating the father's celebratory mood. But Lei only smiled and calmly cast the spell Cemento, opening a portal to another dimension. He explained to his parents that whatever he stored inside this pocket dimension would never rot or decay. The next morning, Lei said his farewells to his parents and the chieftain. Watching him go, his parents held hope in their hearts that with the long lifespan of fairies, they'd see their son again someday. Meanwhile, Lei decided his first stop would be the House of Garland. He recalled meeting Galas 7 years ago and the promise they'd made to meet again. The thought of seeing Gillet again brought a smile to his face. As he reached the edge of the Yggdrasil barrier and stepped outside, he was greeted by the bright, clear skies of the outside world. His good mood, however, was quickly interrupted by the sudden appearance of a pack of magical wolves. Just as the wolves growled and prepared to attack, Lee turned to see someone charging in his direction, a woman with a sword blazing with fire magic. She sprinted past him, swiftly taking down the wolves in a single powerful strike. Lei was both startled and impressed, surprised by her strength and how easily she handled the creatures with just one blow. As the monsters fell, the woman locked eyes with him, her gaze intense and unyielding. To his surprise, she walked toward him with determined steps, stopping in front of him before dropping to one knee. She looked up at him with a fierce resolve and declared that she had been waiting for him for 7 years. She called him Master Fairy, her face a blend of reverence and admiration. Looking closer, Lin noticed a distinctive cross-shaped scar on her chest, and suddenly he recognized her as the young girl he had once saved. Memories of that encounter rushed back, and he remembered how he had saved her, hoping that if her resolve stayed strong, they might meet again. His memories of that time were hazy, yet he decided to trust her words, believing in her dedication. Over the years, she had trained relentlessly, holding on to what he'd once told her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Despite using magic to seal away memories connected to him, she had vowed to become stronger, driven by the promise he'd left her with all those years ago. Lei was struck by an awkward sense of amazement. He hadn't anticipated this level of commitment. She then pulled out a large chest, announcing that she had something to give him to commemorate their reunion. She urged him to take everything, brushing off the fact that it was a massive chest. Curious, Lee opened it and found it brimming with an assortment of glistening fruits. Ever since she heard that fairies loved fruit, she had dedicated herself to gathering as many varieties as she could find from across the land. Excitedly, she encouraged him to eat anything that caught his eye, realizing that Ria's obsession with fruit had influenced her deeply. Lee asked how much it had cost to gather this treasure trove. She admitted that she'd spent all her savings on it, which left him both surprised and speechless. Though he was tempted to say it still might not be enough, he decided to keep that thought to himself. Though he knew she might face challenges of her own, he chose to accept her gratitude. Hearing this, her eyes lit up with hope, and she eagerly asked if she could accompany him wherever he went. She quickly pointed out her experience, mentioning how useful she could be, especially when it came to dealing with humans. For him, a fairy just venturing outside the village, it would indeed be risky, and having a human companion would offer a sense of security. When she asked if he minded her presence, he could see it only filled her with more excitement. She had waited patiently, preparing for this reunion, so there was no need for hesitation on his part. As he grappled with his surprise, she added that she wanted to grow stronger and learn from him for as long as she lived. Her determination was clear, and a quick calculation revealed that her remaining lifespan was around 40 years. It took him a moment to realize she intended to stay by his side for the entirety of that time. The thought reassured him. Having someone willing to commit to such a journey with him felt comforting, even though 40 years felt like a long time. Yet he knew that for a fairy like him, those years would pass swiftly. Lee approached her and extended his hand, formally introducing himself to make their partnership official. He placed himself under her care for the journey ahead. When he asked for her name, she glanced downward, hesitating, her gaze shyly fixed on the ground. After a gentle nudge, she offered a small, embarrassed smile and admitted she didn't have one. Among those in her guild, they simply called her Anonymous. This confession caught Lee off guard. Rumors about a mysterious figure with that alias had even reached his village, a lone traveler who appeared in different places, effortlessly defeating magical beasts before vanishing without a trace. Now standing in front of him, it was confirmed that she was indeed the legendary Anonymous. With a hint of hope in her voice, she asked if he might give her a name. Her request stunned him for a moment as he recalled how he'd saved her all those years ago, giving her a new sense of purpose. She had clung to the hope that one day he'd name her, and that they'd cross paths again. It struck him as incredible that such a brief encounter could mean so much to a young human girl. Perhaps the 7 years she'd waited were hard to fathom, but to her, they had meant everything. He recalled a moment from his past life, when he had once asked his mother why she had chosen his name. Her answer was simple but filled with love. She hoped he would one day bear more fruit than anyone else, growing and achieving more as time went on. That hope was all she had wished for him. Drawing from that memory, he suddenly said, "Minori," then paused, a bit shy, and asked if she liked it. Repeating it softly, Minori's face lit up with a grateful smile, thanking him for the beautiful new name. In his previous life, he hadn't been able to reach his potential, but this time was different. He had someone waiting for him, someone who had trained relentlessly with no guarantee he'd ever return. With that encouragement, he wondered if he could truly accomplish something great. As they walked together, he shared his next destination, the House of Garland. Eager to prove her worth, Minori took out a map and quickly plotted a route. Setting her things down, she opened her magical storage and tried one of the fruits he had given her. The taste sent a pleasant tingling through her body, each bite brimming with flavor. After a while, she found a path through the forest and pointed it out. With that, these two newfound friends began their adventure, walking side by side into the unknown. At the guild, Minori handed over a few captured monsters, asking how much they could get for them. People nearby whispered, calling her strange, but she swiftly shot them a glare and firmly stated her name. Once they fell silent, she turned to Le and said that they should have enough funds now to reach Garland. As they received their payment, the guild attendant hesitated and asked if they were truly planning to venture into the Gallus region in the forest. He mentioned that a young leader had taken charge there, and the local economy had boomed due to the surge in beast hunting quests. Le's mind drifted back to his first encounter with that young man 7 years ago, wondering how much he had changed since then. It had been 3 weeks since Le left the Elf Kingdom, and during that time, Minori had confidently taken the lead, guiding them safely through unfamiliar territory. For someone with little knowledge of the world beyond his homeland, her presence was truly a blessing. As they emerged from the dense forest, the two drew closer to Fort Kerr, marking the borderlands. The feudal lord stationed there kept several magical beasts for protection, fortifying the Empire's defenses against threats from the sacred forest. As Le scanned his surroundings, he noticed several people nursing injuries. The closer they got to the fort, the more casualties they saw. It seemed there had been a recent invasion of magical beasts. Despite Gallus's honorable reputation, they appeared to be struggling against the sudden surge of creatures. Le bit into an apple and casually offered it to Minori, wondering aloud if it tasted as odd to her as it did to him. Surprised, she hesitated, asking if it was truly okay to eat something that had already touched his lips. With a slight nod, he gave his approval. She took a deep breath before finally taking a bite, savoring the taste, which seemed perfectly normal, perhaps even better than she remembered. Her mind drifted back to something Ria had mentioned recently about the declining quality of fruit. Curious, Minori decided to cast an observation spell on the apple. Focusing on its composition, she immediately sensed something off. Amidst the sugars and water content, she detected a faint trace of poison, 1% to be exact. Minori looked at Le, asking if something was wrong, but he brushed it off with a small lie, saying he just wanted her to taste it. His words, though simple, stirred something in her. A warmth crept over her face as her emotions betrayed her calm exterior. Le couldn't believe he'd stumbled upon a phenomenon that was once under demon control. But in this age, there shouldn't be any demons left, a thought that seemed impossible in itself. Finally, they arrived at Fortress Kerr. The guards were skeptical when they casually requested a meeting with the feudal lord, reminding them that as a noble contending for control over the empire, he wasn't someone just anyone could meet. Le suggested he mention his name, assuring him they were friends. But the guard, who had been stationed there for 5 years, insisted he didn't recognize him. This attitude frustrated Minori, who nearly shouted that insulting her master was an insult to her as well. She struggled to keep her composure until someone else joined the conversation, pointing out that things were getting rather noisy. It was Gallus, now looking much older and more mature. Luckily, he recognized the old fairy and greeted him warmly. The two acted like long-lost friends, leaving the guards visibly stunned. Gallus and Lei reminisced about the promise they'd made, both happy to see it fulfilled. Lei explained that he'd come to see him and his father, recalling how years ago he and Git had discussed his journey out of the forest. Fascinated by the idea of a hidden village, Gallus had urged Lei to visit him once he left the forest, as he had something in mind for him. Lei had urged him to stay alive until they could meet again, and Gallus had promised he'd leave as soon as he could. And now, after years, they had kept their promise, standing together once more. Gallus was stunned to learn about his father's actions, and Monori was equally surprised by Lei's connection to the former feudal lord. After confirming it, she noted that father and son were strikingly different. Gallus's father, known as the War God, was a renowned warrior. When asked about his relationship with Gallus, Lei explained that Gallus was the first human he ever spoke to and considered a true friend. With a smile, Gallus shared that his father often spoke fondly of the fairy, reminiscing about their drinks together in the forest and dreaming of making the world a better place. Lei was relieved, as he had worried that their promise would have been forgotten over the years. Gallus laughed, adding that while his father hadn't forgotten, he also couldn't fulfill the promise himself. He'd been bedridden for years now, his health steadily declining. As they entered the dimly lit chamber, they were both taken aback by Git's weakened state. For the past 5 years, he had been lying in that condition, with even the best doctors unable to help. Despite everything, Gallus believed his father would be pleased that his old friend had come to visit. Lei approached the bed, gently calling to him, saying it had been far too long since they last met. Git, once a powerful warrior who defended his land from countless invasions over 2 decades, had been found gravely injured 5 years ago, his strength fading bit by bit ever since. Gallus had stepped into his father's role as ruler, relying on the strength of the people to defend their land, a task his father had once managed alone. Though Gallus knew of his father's injuries, he hadn't fully grasped how remarkable his father's power had been until he was gone. Before visiting, Lei had heard of Git's legendary reputation, but he was unaware of how severely his health had declined. It seemed they kept his condition hidden to avoid alarming the citizens. Reflecting on his friend's fate, Lei examined Git's hand and was stunned to see deep bruising, a detail that sparked an idea. Lei quickly pulled back the blankets, surprising Monori as he closely inspected Git's body. He turned to Gallus, asking if he'd noticed the bruising. Gallus, who was aware of his father's title as the land's strongest mage, admitted he hadn't understood what caused it. Even the most advanced healing spells hadn't worked after noticing the bruises. With that, Lei cast an observation spell, scanning Git's body. After a moment, he saw a reading indicating a staggering 91% concentration of poison in his system, confirming Lei's suspicion that the bruising was poison-related. But a concentration that high was hard to fathom. Even a skilled white mage couldn't counteract it, as the extreme toxicity had made Git's body reject treatment altogether. Lei turned to Gallus, verifying they used the highest-level healing spells. With those failing, there was only one choice left. They would have to attempt the ultimate recovery magic. Gallus was taken aback, even scoffing at the suggestion, saying ultimate recovery magic was practically a myth. But Lei was no ordinary mage. Standing firm, he reminded Gallus that he hadn't spent a century idling away in his village. He had traveled this far to see his friend and couldn't simply turn back without trying everything possible. As Gallus grappled with the gravity of the situation, Lei urged him to listen carefully. Even if this spell worked, Gallus's father would only have about 2 years left. With that knowledge, did they still want to bring him back? After a thoughtful pause, Gallus nodded. His father had always fought alone, hardly sharing his burdens. If he could return, there were things Gallus desperately wanted to say. Understanding, Lei immediately got to work. A glowing magic circle appeared overhead as he began to chant, filling the room with the potent light of elf magic. Legends spoke of a time when humans had nearly mastered this spell, a feat that took decades and represented the peak of recovery magic. This was the legendary ultimate recovery magic, real. The room filled with a blinding light as the elf completed the spell. Slowly, the old weakened man stirred, his fingers twitching, and finally, his eyes opened, seeing light again after years of being bedridden. As his gaze landed on the familiar figure before him, he spoke his master's name, who greeted him warmly, asking what had happened. Smiling like a child, they replied that he'd come to visit, just as they'd promised. Git turned, meeting his son's tearful eyes. Overcome with emotion, Gallus reached for his father, the two embracing for the first time in what felt like an eternity. On that day, Lei's century of dedication and hard work bore fruit. Though he could only gift Git with 2 more years, he had given his friend the priceless gift of a second chance. As Git took in his surroundings, he marveled at waking to find his old master beside his grown son, who had matured over half a decade. His heart swelled with gratitude as he looked at Le, still astonished that he had kept his promise all these years. Git couldn't help but laugh softly at the memory of their agreement now fulfilled. Then Le gently asked him to recall the events of that fateful day when he was gravely injured. Git's face grew serious as he shared what he remembered. The fortress had been attacked, he was almost certain of it, but beyond that, things were foggy. As he struggled to recall more, Le wondered if it might be some otherworldly magic, perhaps a memory-altering spell. His words confused Git, who had no idea what Le meant by another world. Just then, Gallus, the young man, asked if Git believed in the existence of demons. Taken aback by the question, Git listened as the elf revealed that the high concentration of poison in his body could only be the work of demons. Trying to make sense of this, Git asked for guidance. Le, determined to help, laid his hand gently on Git's forehead, using memory-altering magic to unlock the hidden memories clouded by trauma. At first, there was only darkness. Then, faint voices echoed, dismissing Git as just a mere human. The voices sneered, saying the human resistance had stalled their invasion, but their luck had finally run out. Pointing at Git, they remarked he lacked the courage factor, declaring him unworthy. They spoke of continuing their attacks on Kir until someone on the other side emerged with that rare trait, someone whose defeat would open the way for the return of the Demon King. That, they said, was their true mission. As Le watched these visions unfold, he realized Git had faced something far more sinister than anyone knew. If he were to announce the demon's return, it would throw the world into chaos. For now, they decided on a simpler plan, based on the fragments they'd uncovered. To halt the demons, they needed to find someone with the courage factor. But this wouldn't be easy. The demons were operating in secret, hiding somewhere deep within the forest. There's a tale of heroism that defies the conventions of magic. Long ago, the Demon King introduced magic to the world in a single devastating moment. No weapon, no force, no matter how strong, could harm the Demon King. With such overwhelming power, the world fell into chaos as demons swiftly conquered more than half of the land. Meanwhile, in a small, unassuming village, there lived a young man who couldn't use any of the 4 elemental magics. Ridiculed by everyone around him, he held fast to a seemingly impossible dream, to become an adventurer. Undeterred by their scorn, he worked tirelessly to prove himself. Before long, the young man unlocked the ability to wield all 4 elemental magics. He gained the loyalty of 4 extraordinary companions and awakened a mysterious power hidden within him. Armed with this newfound strength and supported by his friends, he set out on a perilous journey to defeat the Demon King. Against all odds, he triumphed, earning the title of a hero and forever remembered as the brave one. Gillett struggled to wrap his mind around the idea that demons had truly returned. Yet the undeniable evidence lay before him. His memories had been altered by magic. The mention of the factor of courage added weight to the situation. If such a thing existed, then perhaps the old legend wasn't just a tale. Surely they were referring to the story of the renowned hero, a tale known across the entire kingdom. It was supposed to be nothing more than a myth. However, as Gillett recalled, even in Eldon Village, Lee had come across records of ancient battles in the library. These records described the factor of courage as a power beyond this world. Now, the demons were actively hunting for a human who possessed this elusive trait. That was why Gillett and his allies had to find them first. Thankfully, the demons seemed unaware they were already being tracked. Judging by their conversations, the demons were convinced that the person they sought could be found at Kir Fortress. This explained the recent surge in monster subjugation requests and the increasing number of adventurers flocking to the area. If this truly mirrored the old legend, then the one with the factor of courage must be among them. For a moment, Gillett stared at his frail hands, reflecting on his master's decision to head toward the front lines. He questioned why someone so important would go to such lengths. The response was direct, turning the question back on him. He no longer needed to bear everything alone. Lee had a new lease on life, with 9,100 years ahead of him and a world beyond the control of demons. The mere thought of living in a world dominated by their darkness was unbearable. 1 week later, the air was lively with the aroma of a grand feast. A bustling restaurant had been reserved, and an array of exquisite dishes awaited. Minoru could hardly contain his excitement, his eyes sparkling and mouth watering. A woman nearby chuckled warmly, encouraging him to eat as much as he wanted. The atmosphere was delightful, and the orchestrator of this beautiful gathering was none other than Gillett's wife, Silpha. Remembering her from past conversations, Lee couldn't resist asking if she was the childhood friend Gillett had often spoken about. With a laugh, Gillett recalled his long-standing promise to introduce her someday, a promise made well before they were married. Silpha stepped forward, her expression soft and full of gratitude. Bowing deeply, tears welled in her eyes as she expressed her heartfelt thanks for everything Lee had done for her husband. Though Lee tried to assure her it wasn't necessary, Gillett interrupted with a knowing smile, teasingly calling his wife incredibly sweet. This moment of warmth brought back a memory for La, a time years ago when Silpha had embraced him in the forest, showing the same sincerity and kindness. He remarked on the fleeting nature of human life, calling it both tragic and fascinating, a peculiar compliment for someone like Ralph. With the mood lightened, he turned to Manor and invited him to join the meal. Manor hesitated, surprised to be included, but was warmly welcomed again with a broad smile. Before long, the room was filled with laughter and satisfied sighs as everyone indulged in the delicious food. Their enthusiastic reactions motivated Sufa to prepare even more dishes, though the guests could barely keep up. For those who had survived on forest rations, this feast was an extraordinary luxury. As Sufa glanced at Manor, she commented that he reminded her of her husband in his youth, and her warm smile proved her point. Gil joined in, praising her cooking, his tone as cheerful as that of the younger crowd. Amid the lively conversation and shared joy, someone finally asked how Gil and the elf had come to know each other. Just as Lee began to explain their connection, Manor abruptly stood up, proudly declaring that he was Lee's partner and introducing himself to the room with confidence. The announcement left everyone stunned. Ed, trying to salvage the situation, immediately interjected to clarify things, but Manor's boldness sparked a wave of playful teasing among the group. Eventually, Lee stepped in, explaining with a sigh that they were simply traveling companions. Manor, however, seemed less than thrilled by the correction, a pout forming on his face as the others chuckled at his expense. Seeing the disappointment on her face, Silpha approached the young woman with a warm smile and asked if she'd like to try cooking something herself. The suggestion caught Minori off guard. Embarrassed, she glanced away, admitting shyly that she was only good at fighting and had never cooked a day in her life. Silpha chuckled gently, recalling an old saying, "The way to a man's heart is through his stomach." Encouraged, Minori hesitated but eventually agreed, willing to try anything if it might make Lee happy. With that, the two women headed into the kitchen. Meanwhile, Gillett leaned closer to his master, lowering his voice to a whisper. He mentioned the difficulty of humans and elves having children together. His words left Lee puzzled, prompting him to ask what Gillett was trying to imply. Gillett responded with a knowing smile, asking what Lee planned to do about it. Lee sighed, admitting that for now he didn't see Minori that way. Gillett's smile faded slightly as he noted how unfortunate that was, especially since Minori's lifespan would end long before Lee's. The weight of his words hung in the air. Minori, though, seemed unfazed, or perhaps she had accepted this truth long ago. She focused on the task at hand, her smile bright as she followed Silpha's cooking instructions. Her determination shone through even in this unfamiliar setting. Not long after, the time came for Lee and Minori to take their leave. Gillett stood by the doorway, watching them prepare to depart. He called out to Lee one last time, gently placing a few items onto his shoulders. With a bittersweet smile, he bid them farewell, his voice steady but his eyes carrying the weight of unspoken gratitude and regret. They ventured into the great forest, a mysterious and perilous region where magical beasts roamed freely. The group was cautioned to remain vigilant, as the forest was notorious for its dangers. With solemn nods and words of farewell, they parted ways, setting out on their journey. The great forest was a prime hunting ground for adventurers seeking magical beasts, a place that pulsed with both opportunity and risk. For Minori, it was uncharted territory, though she had encountered creatures that wandered as far as the fortress gates. This was a new challenge. The forest teemed with both dangerous wildlife and ambitious adventurers, making constant alertness crucial. Gillett shared a piece of information that sparked their interest. Deep within the forest lay an abandoned house, one he thought might serve as an ideal base for their operations. But their primary objective weighed heavily on their minds, finding the elusive factor of courage. The task seemed daunting. To uncover the individual they sought, they needed to identify someone incapable of using elemental magic. That meant asking nearly everyone they encountered, a prospect that seemed both time-consuming and uncertain. Pausing to think, Lee resolved to rely on his judgment magic, a skill that could potentially simplify the search. However, with the sheer number of people they might encounter, using it on everyone was an overwhelming prospect. The road ahead promised to be challenging, but their determination to uncover the truth and fulfill their mission remained steadfast. Minori rushed toward him, her excitement evident as she marveled at how he had managed to identify the hero with his magic. Calmly, he admitted that it was indeed possible. Overwhelmed by curiosity and wonder, she cast her judgment magic on herself to examine her own status. A radiant light appeared, followed by a window revealing her title, Reincarnator of Another World. The title resonated deeply, its meaning unmistakably tied to power beyond this world. He chose to keep this revelation to himself, turning his focus back to Minori. With a serious tone, he asked if she was truly all right with everything that was unfolding. Confused by his question, she tilted her head. He clarified, explaining that he was referring to their journey together. They had already discussed the daunting reality. Finding the one with the factor of courage could take years, perhaps decades. They might even find themselves stuck in the forest for an extended period, potentially disrupting her short life as a human. He tried to urge her to reconsider, telling her it wasn't too late to step away. But before he could finish, Minori cut him off firmly. She declared she had already made her decision. For years she had chased after an illusion of who she wanted to be. Now she had clarity. Minori had told him before, her happiness was staying by his side and growing stronger alongside him. With unwavering conviction, she proclaimed her choice. She would follow him for the rest of her life, no matter where the journey led them. Her confession caught him off guard, leaving him speechless as she turned away, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. With a quiet resolve, she declared that she would stay by his side no matter his opinion, then hurried off before he could respond. He sighed deeply, frustrated with himself. How could I let things get so close to the edge? He muttered, shaking his head. He lightly slapped his own cheek as if to reset his focus, only to scold himself again for being so unsettled by her words. Then her voice called out, breaking his train of thought. She had discovered the location they'd been searching for, the house. It was about 6 hours' walk from Quar, tucked deep within the wilderness. As they approached, he noticed the marks of countless battles along the path. Monsters had clearly been abundant in the area. According to Gillett, the house had once been used as a rest stop by his predecessor. Being a noble's retreat, they both anticipated a level of elegance and comfort. However, reality hit hard when they stepped inside. The house was in ruins, a shadow of its former glory. Dust coated every surface, furniture was broken or missing, and the air carried the weight of neglect. Any hopes of luxury vanished in an instant, replaced by disappointment and the realization that their work here had only just begun. Minori's mood took a sudden dive, her usual energy replaced by a heavy silence that immediately worried Le. Concerned, he asked her what was wrong. Slowly, she called his name, her voice so soft it sent a chill down his spine. Then, with a deep breath, she began to express her frustration. She gestured at the now renovated mansion and complained bitterly. "You fixed this entire place with magic in an instant," she exclaimed. "I thought this was my chance to prove myself, to finally feel useful. But no, I foolishly made a pact with some spirits just to help me clean up." She recounted how she had worked for years to master breaking contracts with spirits, bragging about her accomplishment at the age of 78, only to feel utterly defeated now. Le blinked in confusion, questioning why this bothered her so much. She simply argued that it wasn't about the task itself, it was about the chance to contribute, which she felt had been snatched away. Ignoring her sulking, Le moved on to the final touch for the mansion's defenses. He called forth Akal Sil, an ancient magic, and summoned a seed. Planting it deep in the earth, he smirked at Minori's puzzled expression and told her to just wait and watch. Moments later, a small sprout emerged from the ground. Within seconds, it grew into a massive tree that radiated an incredible barrier, enveloping the entire mansion. With this spell, the building became completely hidden from the outside world. Neither magical beasts nor demons could penetrate or even detect its location. As Le stood back, clearly proud of his work, Minori could only watch in awe. To her, it was as if he created a smaller version of the legendary Yggdrasil. Her earlier frustration melted into a quiet realization. Le didn't need her help. He was entirely capable of handling everything on his own. She lowered her gaze, grappling with the humbling truth. She remembered his words about their mutually beneficial journey, how he was always kind to her despite knowing she could do little in return. He acted as though she was some sort of gift, even though she knew he would be fine on his own. Deep down, she recognized it was her selfish desire to stay by his side that kept her clinging to him. She had no memories of her parents and had barely survived as a slave, until one fateful day when Lee appeared and rescued her from the brink of death. For 7 years she had struggled to grow stronger. knowing she had no one else to depend on. And during that time she waited, every day, at the place they had agreed upon, clinging to the memory of his promise. Now as she stood beside him, she wanted to tell her younger self that her dream had come true. Yet simply being with him wasn't enough anymore. She didn't want to keep Leia at her side just to satisfy her own selfish wish. Instead, she yearned to be more, to be someone who could truly stand alongside him, stronger and more capable. Determined, she called out to the spirit and asked a pointed question. Did he plan to defeat the Demon King with someone who possessed the factor of courage once they found them? Le paused, reflecting for a moment before responding. He admitted he intended to take a different approach since they wouldn't have the synergy to work together immediately. Even so, he confessed that he didn't know how far into the future the final battle might be. But regardless of the obstacles ahead, he would do everything in his power to stop the Demon King. His unwavering resolve lit a fire in her heart, strengthening her determination to be by his side, not as a mere companion, but as an equal who could share in the fight to shape the future. Confident in her abilities, she nonetheless approached him with a request. Could he train her while they were there? Surprised, he asked why, knowing she was already strong. But when she smiled and expressed her desire to stand alongside him in the fight against the Demon King, he couldn't help but agree. After all, her goal was to grow even stronger. With understanding and resolve, he granted her request. From that moment on, they trained relentlessly, day after day. Time passed, and life around them continued to change. One of the most notable changes was the arrival of a new baby in the Garland household, filling the once quiet home with fresh energy. Before they realized it, 2 years had gone by. One day, as they trained together in the forest, they sprinted side by side through a clearing. Minori suddenly detected movement to the east. With sharp focus, she identified 5 magical beasts and even detailed their formation with impressive accuracy. Over the past 2 years, she had honed her skill in long-range detection magic to an exceptional level. Excited by her discovery, she asked if she could handle an A-rank magical beast on her own. He hesitated briefly, surprised by her confidence, but then smiled proudly and gave her a nod of encouragement. With a determined gleam in her eye, she charged toward the challenge. He stepped back to observe, letting her prove herself. Pride swelled in his chest as he watched her in action. But just as he began to relax, something else caught his attention, a faint sound from deeper within the forest. His instincts sharpened immediately, signaling that this wasn't over. At that moment, a frantic rooster darted through the clearing, squawking loudly as it zipped past. Oddly enough, the creature didn't even glance at Minori, as if she were invisible. Without hesitation, she cast wind magic, knocking the bird out cold in a single strike. The rooster collapsed, utterly unaware of what hit it. But something felt off. The rooster's behavior wasn't normal. It wasn't just running, it was fleeing. It became clear that the bird wasn't the true threat. Suddenly, the real danger emerged from the shadows. A wild bear, towering and ferocious, its presence far more intimidating than anything Minori had faced. The beast locked its piercing gaze onto the humans, studying its prey with unsettling focus. Nearby, he began preparing a spell, imbuing his sword with advanced fire magic. Flames danced along the blade as his incantation grew in power. The bear let out a deafening roar and lunged forward, its claws glinting menacingly in the light. Unfazed, he completed his spell just in time. A blazing phoenix materialized behind him, its fiery wings spreading wide as it merged with the sword, engulfing the blade in an intense inferno. As the bear charged, its claws swiping viciously, he didn't back down. Instead, he met the attack head-on, his movements precise and calculated. With a single flawless swing, his fiery sword struck the beast. The impact was decisive, and the wild bear collapsed to the ground, lifeless and spent. The clearing grew silent once more, save for the crackle of fading flames. Victory was his,